I would like to call to order the May 7th, 2024 meeting of the Cloverdale Planning Commission at 6:02. Pledge of Allegiance. You can all rise. Commissioner Acey, would you please start us off?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk, can we please have a roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Let the record reflect that all commissioners are present with the exception of Chair Sanders and Commissioner Cadle.
Do any commissioners have any conflicts of interest for any items listed on tonight's agenda?
Yes, I'll have to recuse myself.
Mr. City Clerk, let the record reflect that Commissioner Williams will be abstaining from item G1 due to conflict of interest. Staff, are there any changes or deletions to the agenda this evening?
No changes, Vice Chair.
On to public comments. Any person wishing to speak to the Planning Commission on any item not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the Planning Commission is not allowed to consider issues or take action on any item not listed on the agenda. Comments from the public will be allowed on all agenda items at the time each item is called. In-person commenters may fill out a speaker card before or after they have spoken. Please submit to the City Clerk for the record. 3 minutes are allowed to each speaker. With that, I will now officially open the public comment period at 6:04. Mr. City Clerk, are there any members of the audience wishing to speak at this time?
Thank you, Chair. No one is raising their hand at this time.
Moving on to communications, it shows there are none on the agenda. Item D, presentations. There are also no presentations on the agenda at this time. Moving on to the consent calendar. All items under the consent calendar will be considered together by one action of the Planning Commission unless any commissioner or member of the public request that an item be removed and considered separately. Would any member of the Planning Commission or public like to move an item from the consent calendar? Can I get a motion for the consent calendar?
Move we accept the accept.
Second.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I get a clarification? Who was the second? I didn't see it. Thank you.
Acey.
All right, we have a first with Wiggy, second with Acey, and I will start with that. Commissioner Wiggy?
Aye.
Commissioner Acey?
Aye.
Commissioner Carney?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
And Vice Chair Spengler.
Aye.
Consent calendar passes.
All right, moving on to public hearings. There are also none on the agenda. And now new business item G1, recreational vehicle off-street parking regulations discussion.
Thank you, Chair. We put together a presentation to help you guys walk through what the items or what the issues are with this item. And Mike, if you could bring that up. Our goal tonight really is to start to get your input on this. If there are going to be recommended changes to the zoning ordinance, we'll come back with a formal resolution having the Planning Commission recommend those amendments to the City Council. But at this point, we're just going to talk about it. We've got some discussion points in our PowerPoint. I know there's a lot of folks from the public who will probably want to come speak on this, so we can listen to the public and come up with some ideas, and then Raphael and I will come back with, at the next meeting, with potentially a proposed amendment. So. Let's go to the next one. Sorry. So just why we're here with this item, there was some code enforcement issues regarding the parking of RVs in driveways. The city council, at one of the city council meetings, people came up and spoke in the beginning under the public comment. The city council directed it to a subcommittee. The subcommittee directed it to the planning commission, and so here we are. So just a little background on why we're doing this. Next slide, Mike. Again, our goal is to discuss possible amendments to the zoning code regarding RV storage. We want to receive the public comments, and if the commission wants to provide direction to us, we will take that direction and propose some amendments and return with those at the next meeting. So you may have reviewed the current regulations in our zoning code regarding the parking of recreational vehicles. It's pretty vague. There's not a lot to go on here. It does require screening. It doesn't define screening, so we're going to get into that a little bit. And it doesn't really give us much direction on if any kind of guidance on how an RV could be stored at a house, if it's acceptable and what parameters would be needed to be followed for that to happen. Next slide, Mike. The existing regulations do not prohibit the parking of RVs in front of houses. I think that might be kind of a misconception, but it does allow that. It does talk about screening, but it doesn't define the screening in any way. So again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Mike? So here's some pictures. I mean, if we drove around, there's probably not one block in town that doesn't have some form of RV or boat parked on the driveway, or in the driveway in the front, on the side, sometimes in the back. So just so you know, I know you guys already know this, but it's very, very predominant in the city of Cloverdale. Next slide. So we put together these discussion points that we really want to focus the conversation on. If anyone in the audience wants to add to this, or on the commission, add to our discussion points, but these are the things we're going to try to hone in on to get your direction on this item. So for each one of these, I have a little bit more information that we're going to start to go through now. Mike? So the definition of an RV, I mean, is just going to include boats, trailers, recreational vehicles, fifth wheels. This is just a kind of a longer definition, but if the intent is to include those other types of vehicles, then that's one of the discussion points we'd like to hear from the commission on. And we could be more explicit in the ordinance that it does apply to boats, watercraft, utility trailers, and things like that. Next slide, Mike. The current ordinance does say residential properties. There is an opportunity here we're going to recommend that we continue to use the definition residential properties, but there is an opportunity if the commission would like to break that out into different zones, R1, R2. R3 is more of an apartment setting, so it probably wouldn't apply to that. There's also a lot of planned developments in town, which are essentially R1, single-family subdivisions. We could, for simplicity's sake, we could just leave it as residential properties as it's currently written. But again, I'm just going to run through these, and then we'll come back to each one after we receive public hearing, and we can discuss them at more length. There are some examples of the screening that we did find out there. One of the things with the screening is that the highest fence that we currently allow in the front is a 5-foot fence, and that requires a permit. Like a 3-foot fence does not require a permit. So some of these screening examples, if the commission liked those, would have to be reduced to 5 feet, or we'd have to do additional amendments to the code, which I wouldn't recommend. But at this point, we do allow a 5-foot fence, but these are just some examples that we found from a different zoning ordinance in Washington, which was a very thorough ordinance that we included in your packet. Next slide, Mike. So you can see in the examples here in the pictures, some of these RVs or boats and things are just parked on the grass or on the lawn. We were kind of recommending that we add some language in the ordinance that would require some sort of hard surface, gravel, pavers, or whatever. We're open to ideas on that one. Of course, concrete always works, but being more explicit about not being able to allow these types of vehicles on the lawn or just a dirt patch or something like that. It would have to be more of a formal pad made up of one of these types of surfaces. Next one, Mike. Setback, so the current regulations are silent on setbacks, and the practice has been to allow these vehicles to be parked in the setback. Frankly, if we did not allow the parking in the setback, it would really hinder almost everyone's example in town of doing this. As you can see, the one on the right is there, and the side yard setback is 5 feet, the front is 20. The current ordinance is silent when it comes to setbacks. And one of the things that setbacks are important to is the fire district. So we did have a conversation with Chief Jenkins regarding the way that some of these are parked with not adhering to the setback, and he's okay with it. He said it's fine, he knows it's happening, and he doesn't really see it as a hindrance to their ability to fight fire. I mean, it's just kind of, setbacks are always something that the fire district is interested in, so we made a point to discuss that with them. Mike? So again, the current ordinance has nothing in it about the appearance. So, I mean, we are suggesting maybe adding something there if the direction is to allow this. I mean, obviously the inoperable ones would not be acceptable if they're in disrepair. We do have a small section in our code that discusses inoperable vehicles that we were thinking if the council, or if the commission is wanting to add something about the appearance of these, that we could refer to that section of the code, which is in section 8. And it really just talks about inoperable vehicles and disabled vehicles on private property in a way to remedy that. So we would recommend that any code amendment would include something related to inoperable and possibly a reference to our current existing code that deals with that. Next one, Mike. So that's what we have. I know this is probably a big topic, and we could take our time to go through each one of these, and we can keep the PowerPoint up and go back to look at the examples, additional information that we just went through regarding these discussion points. So at this point, I'd turn it back to the chair. You can, Raphael and I are here for questions. We can answer questions now, and then open it up to the public after that.
We get a little bit more definition or detail on what we're classifying as inoperable and what the solutions are in those situations.
Let's, you want to, maybe if there's more questions, we'll just write them down so we can go back into the code.
Oh, yeah, let's write them down.
Let's open it up to public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Okay, if there's any other questions from the commission now,
I
that
think we
we
should go through some questions first.
Okay.
First question is, you mentioned that there are code violations, multiple code violations that happen throughout the city, but yet the screening and some of those weren't fully defined. What were some of those code violations that actually brought this to the staff's attention to make this a project report to bring through the subcommittee to this commission?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's not multiple code enforcement issues. There's a couple code issues going on right now that they're not screened, is essentially what the violation would be. There's no real definition of the screening, so I think that's kind of where the dilemma is a little bit. That's why we're trying to clarify the ordinance.
There other public reports of items of concern that brought this to the attention of the staff?
No, there wasn't.
Are the complaints more related to visibility between neighboring yards or street facing?
I would say between neighboring yards, but they are visible from the street as well, so.
I was driving around looking, and it doesn't appear that there's been any effort to enforce the current code. I'm not sure who's responsible for enforcing it, but just on the street I drove down on the way here, I counted 3 that were not screened, that's for sure. And, I don't,
Yeah.
it seems to me, well, I don't know. I'll wait a bit. I'll wait for a comment.
We made a conscious effort to have code enforcement that's complaint-driven, and that was at the discussion at the council as well. So that's how we do our code enforcement currently. It's complaint-driven. If we had, somebody driving around, we would be.
I just wanted some
Inundated.
context as to what was really the complaint so we can kind of figure out how to wrap our minds on a solution that the city can involve. Is it because we're seeing parking into easements and on the street? Are we actually seeing people encroaching on passways? Or is it more of a
Screening.
site condition and a screening issue
Screening.
of someone putting something on their own personal property? Or are they crossing property lines? That's some of my questions.
Yeah, and we certainly, when we get into our discussion points, would definitely recommend that if we allow this, that it has to be on the property. I mean, obviously, they can't be encroaching into the sidewalk or the right-of-way. I mean, that is an absolute no-brainer. I think the nature of the complaints that brought all of this to us was related to the screening and the visual impact of the RVs in the driveways.
Tallest fence allowable is 6 feet, correct?
In the
Between-
front setback, it's 5. It's with Rob, you can chime in on any of these. That's with a permit.
6 foot should be the screening, but ours is 5 feet.
Right.
Yeah, it's,
I was saying in between though is, because it's 5 and then 6
yeah,
in
in the
between,
front yard,
right?
it's 3, but Kevin's saying 5 because there's a minor process property owner's going to ask for a minor exception and allows 2 additional feet. So that's why the slide said 5 feet with a permit. So it's really 3 feet, but up to 5 as a maximum in the front yard. So and the front yard is essentially the first 20 feet of someone's property usually. So, but after that, in the side and rear, it's up to 7 feet nowadays without a building permit. Yeah.
And roughly, what does that permit cost?
The minor exception or the minor exception, I believe, is $550.
When we were talking on the screen about zones, you said not R3, which is apartment buildings. Why would we exclude probably the most affected area of parking and storage and how that could affect their tenants or their other neighbors?
Well, the thought was, and this is all open to debate, this is just kind of our
Yeah.
shot at trying to frame the issue. The thought was that typically in R3, it's a higher density, and it probably wouldn't have room to store an RV, and it's.
I'm just saying, if we're going to go down to make recommendations, I would want to protect that same kind of code would need to go into that area, because although you may assume that they're not going to have an RV, if they do.
Well,
it
and there
could
could be a
affect multiple
situation
people.
where there's a single-family home in R3. I mean, that's certainly plausible. I'm sure you can think of an example. So, again, I was kind of hesitant to put the zoning in there for this reason. I mean, it could be as simple as what's in there now and just leave it as residential properties as opposed to trying to parse up all the different zones and do it that way. But I thought it was worth at least,
Discussion.
bring it up.
Kevin, do we have anything in the code that precludes parking a trailer on the street or an RV?
72 hours. It's in one, so this is all private property. This is where the zoning code, on the street is the vehicle code. This is the police enforcement.
Well, if this is, if the enforcement is complaint-driven, like it's a vehicle to get the city involved in feuds between neighbors or something, yeah, just that. I don't know, I find that to be kind of troublesome.
Chair Carney? Casey?
Through with the questions for now.
Now we can open it up for public comment.
State their name and address.
That's right. Members of the community making public comment, you are limited to 3 minutes. Please start by stating your name. Thank you.
Just as a quick point of clarity, if you care about how I spell your name, make sure to fill out one of those cards and leave it over here.
So my name is Barbara LeBlanc. I live on Elbridge. I made the complaint. And I waited over a month, and someone high up in the city council stopped it because they knew the person. So my whole thing is, if there's a code, there's a code, and it should be enforced. And my understanding of the ordinance right now is that an RV has to be in a building, a garage, or behind some kind of screening that you can't see from the street. And that's not what's taking place on our street. So just to let you know, I live near the development Rancho de Amigos, and I've been watching a boat sitting on the public street in that development at a stop sign both ways since April 4th. I've been taking pictures. And if a child crossed a street in front of that boat and didn't see a car coming, the car could hit him. Nobody is saying anything about this boat in a residential neighborhood on a public street. And I do not want to be the witch turning everybody in. But I've lived here for 22 years, and I've seen the neighborhoods get worse and worse. And I have an RV, and I don't park it at my house. It's the cost of having an RV. I don't know where I'm at with time, but it's like having a dog. You take it to the vet, you get it boarded when you leave, you take good care of it. You do the same thing with an RV. So I'm just going to leave it with the best neighbor to have is an unobtrusive neighbor. And that's how I feel about it. And I want to keep living here. I want to live in a town that is beautiful without everybody's toys all over the place. So that's it. I think I'm 3 minutes.
Still got a minute.
Yeah, that's it. Kevin's starting to know me very well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the community that would like to make a comment at this time?
My name is Dan Wilson. I'm Barb's neighbor. I live on Elbridge. You weren't here last month or in March, Barb, but I came to the city council and requested this, so thank you. Thank you for taking me seriously and allowing me to interact with, the community process. That makes us a great community. I had my RV parked in my driveway for 4 years. 4 years before Barb complained. Why now? Why didn't she ever come talk to me? I don't know. The other thing that I want to reiterate too is that these just aren't recreational vehicles anymore. Times have changed. All I have to do is point to the at least four fires that we've had in the area and tell countless stories of hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, that had to drive hundreds of miles away to get evacuated in order to search for a darn room in a hotel. People bought RVs to avoid that problem. They're not just recreational, they're actual tools. They're tools that help us escape efficiently and, just comply with the overall recommendations of an evacuation plan that the county and the city has been promoting for the last 4 years. It's a good plan. Let it work. The byproduct of those tools are recreation. My girls love it. We use it every month. Every month for the past 4 years. I think it probably saved us from going crazy during COVID. Seriously. As you go forward with this ordinance, I think you really need to identify what problem you're trying to solve with this. And how are you going to keep the community, how are we going to get community buy-off? Because this is a big problem. It's a big problem. It's a big problem, and you've got to get community buy-off at this point because it's gone out of control. In general, talking with Barb, she's never talked to me about this. It seems to be an appearance problem. And generally, I think you can solve this problem with two things. One, make sure it's not infringing on the sidewalks. And two, make sure the darn thing's operable and registered. That way, if it's not allowed to be driven on the streets or on the waters, it's not allowed to be parked in your front yard. That's a simple fix. Thanks.
Are there any other community members that would like to speak?
My name's Michelle Blathy, and I was also here last month for the city council meeting. A big issue with this complaint, and you had hit on it, that it is complaint driven. And this particular neighbor and her friend across the street have called the cops on us for so many different things. Our daughter parks her car in the open land space. Now we're getting a complaint about our motorhome. It's been almost weekly that we've gotten complaints from them. So they could complain about us. I live directly next door to Dan. But 5 houses down, if they didn't complain, they would be allowed to keep their motorhome or their vehicle parked there. And as I was told, she was correct that the screening involved only being in a garaged unit. That's what I was told. And we keep our motorhome in our driveway. It is not infringing on the sidewalk. It is a clean motorhome. We keep up with our yard. I totally understand if it wasn't, operable, but also this is regarding private property. And I was told that if I needed to, that I could just move my vehicle every 3 days, and it could be right on the street in front of their house or across the street. And I think that would upset them even more, blocking their view, and instead it could be parked on my own private property. We have big shrubs blocking the side of it, a big tree above it. It's not hidden, it's a motorhome, but it's a 24-foot motorhome. And it's not, my 2 neighbors next door to me have both told me that they have, or one next door to me and the one next door to him, said they have absolutely no problem, that they are happy to see that we are young families, going out there, being active and using our motorhomes and our trailers. And it's just tough when we might be the only 2 on our street, but you might drive down a street a few blocks down and there might be 1 in every other driveway. And it's just hard to understand why we might have a disgruntled neighbor who has been harassing us when someone else streets over can keep their vehicles on their own private property. So like Dan said, I understand if it was not working or if it was dilapidated or if it was, blocking even a stop sign, if it was on the edge of, at the edge of the street or something like that. But none of ours are doing any of those things. So that's all I want to say.
Any other community members?
Hi there, I'm Suzanne Black, and I actually live one street over from Elbridge. I live on Cottage Court. My concern is a little bit different. It doesn't sound like anybody wants, I hope, to get rid of the ordinance. And that was my main concern when I first heard about this, because there's lots of folks, including myself, who have RVs parked elsewhere. And if there was no ordinance at all, more of them might come home. My concern specifically that I just wanted to highlight for you guys is when I drive down Elbridge, there are at least twice as many cars on the street as on my street. And there are kids on that street. There's quite a few kids on Elbridge. And years ago, I had a friend who had a kid dart out from behind a car over in Tarman Track, and my friend hit that kid. So that's what I worry about. I worry about the general too many cars on the street as a result of RVs parked in the driveway. One of the issues, sadly, for Elbridge is that there's also a guy who owns a tree trimming business, and he brings home his big trucks and his, what do you call that thing? Wood chipper, which is a whole separate issue. But that compacts that street even more. So I just wanted to bring up for you guys that that's my concern, primarily, is safety of kids. It's just really, there's cars on both sides of that street. And hearing that some of you have driven all over town and it's everywhere, it's sort of another, I share Bill's concern about complaint-driven issues as someone who goes to Friday Night Live and sees a big sandwich board saying no dogs and everyone has their dog. Having been kicked out of the Wednesday night market in Santa Rosa because I had a dog, only to see 3 other dogs as I'm walking my dog back to my car. It's just a thing that personally irks me, but I also understand small towns and budget issues, and I'm not sure how you to affect not having this issue be complaint-driven. But anyway, I hope that we end up still with an easement and that it's not a thing that pits neighbor against neighbor and that, you know, everybody can be safe. Thanks.
Thank you. Another member of the community that would like to speak?
My name is Rick White. I live on Elbridge, and I'm one of the guys that Dan and his partner were talking about. I came from the Bay Area originally, and the thing of it is that I'm not advocating that we become the Bay Area, but the one thing they did there, which was really a good idea, was to protect property values. They made a code that could be enforced that said, okay, you can have an RV, but if you have an RV, you've either got to surround it with something or you got to put it in a storage yard. And that's all we're asking. It's not anything personal, Dan. It's not. It's just one of these things when you look down your street, and the folks that have these things use them like a storage shed. They go in and out of them multiple times a week. So the thing of it is that what I'm about for this thing is to protect my investment in the property that I bought 2 years ago. That's what I'd really like to do. So I want everybody to have a good time, all my neighbors to have a good time. I don't wish any of them ill will, but I want them to also respect the fact that I've invested in this town. I own 2 properties in this town, and I'd like to protect that investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Good evening. My name is Bob Cox. I'm a former planning commissioner. I'm a former council member. I was part of the council when this ordinance was drafted originally. Screening was vague because it could take many forms, fencing, landscaping, whatever. That's why it's that kind of vague, but the intent is still there. Screening is screening. For many years, it has been complaint-driven. Why is that? We didn't have a code enforcement officer in this town. We had our employees were a very small staff here in town, and so it had to be complaint-driven. There is now a code enforcement officer. I think that person can and should enforce the code, and with that would help tremendously with the complaints that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Any other public comments? Okay, with no other public comments, we'll bring it back to the Planning Commission for discussion.
Sure, go ahead.
I can see where we definitely need to define what screening it needs to be. I think started off with, we can't enforce removal of RVs and boats in storage from yards because there is no place to take them in town. I think there's one storage yard, if I'm not mistaken, that can accept these, and
Also has
they're
poor screening.
I think they're at capacity, and they're always getting burglarized. So demanding that people pay more money and try to find a place to take their RV boat trailer is just not reasonable. It kind of sounds like some of the public comments that there is this misconception that these are hurting home values, but from what I heard is that some of these RVs were existing in these yards and people still bought the homes regardless of those RVs being there, and they weren't deterred from buying in that neighborhood. So I don't see that as an issue. I bought my home with an RV parked directly next door. It's actually one of the ones that is in the picture. Didn't even think twice about it. I also think that we have areas of our community that are HOAs that make people agree to things like no boats in your yard, no RVs, and that if seeing these things in people's yards upsets you, then you should be in an HOA. Those are the kind of people that HOAs are intended for. I also feel that we are limited with screening between yards to 7 feet. So we can only get so much screening, right? Like we can't completely block the height of an RV. We're also talking about people incurring additional costs to build new fences and add different forms of screening, although we should define what screening is. I think that's fair. Anybody else want to speak?
Well, I think we should take a different approach at this. I mean, I agree that we should come to a consensus of hopefully a good recommendation for screening, but I think that there's other priorities ahead of this. I think that making a recommendation there is no code of official. I get that. Thank you, Bob. I totally appreciate that. Can it be funded through code enforcement and violations? I don't know if that would support a staffer's salary you might clean the city up once, but then you've got to stay on top of it. I do believe we have a problem in code enforcement of storage, and it's not on the private property. It's on the streets and the easements and trespassing, and it's inoperable vehicles that are the problem. I don't want to get down the path of defining what is a great condition versus a poor condition unit, because I don't want to get involved in who has wealth and who does not have wealth in that whole debate. But I do think that there's an easy delineation between what is inoperable and what is abandoned or condemnable versus what is functioning and usable. And I really appreciate both of your opinions on this because I can see both sides of the fence. I do not own an RV, but after being through the fires myself, I too see the value in having a go bag, and what better go bag than an RV? So I can see that value. So screening that away is also a safety concern for me if they can park it safely on their property and be able to access it to get away in an easy manner. So screening a driveway is something that I'm not supportive of because I don't want to pay or force people to start to have gates in front of their homes. And maybe it's looking deeper into the setbacks of what can be stored in a driveway, but if we're going to start to go down that path of what can be stored in the driveway, we need to start to determine what sequence we are focusing on, because then you're going to go down the path of saying vehicles in driveways. So is it vehicles? Is it boats? Is it RVs? Is it what devices in what order is what we should prioritize on? So what my focus, I think, should be on what is the priority. I think focusing on street and easement parking is first. Then I think redefining what that screening is and improving the regulations to show what screening can be, especially if it's off of a driveway or a direct access to the home. I think you need to enforce the street traffic and those safety issues. I live on 4th Street. I have this wonderful person, not a neighbor, who moves his RV 3 feet every 48 hours, but it still stays in front of my house. So if all y'all want to keep your RVs, just park it on the street and move it a couple feet every couple days, because that's within the city's code and enforcement. So I think we have a different priority where we need to focus on the safety of our neighborhood. On 4th Street, it is so thin that you cannot drive down there 2 cars at a time. And everyone uses that as a detour from the boulevard. And when that guy is parked there, I've also seen kids almost get hit. So I think there's a different priority of what is safety. When it's on the property, I don't want to determine what people can do on their own property. But I think if it's becoming a nuisance to the neighbors, I think we need to talk about how it's screening from the neighbors. And I think off the side or rear parking of these type of devices and vehicles should be screened if they can, but if it's on a driveway, I don't know if you can screen it if it's operable and movable. And I also think that there's an issue around town. So I think focusing on what's on the street and traffic is a problem, because I do see people using our streets as storage for their fleet of employees. And so I don't want to open the door to saying that every home has to have this many vehicles or things at their home, but what can be in the improvement in the code for, we can tell that you're storing 6 utility vehicles for your company on our street. I just think there's a different priority than simply just screening in this.
I think you make a really good point about when we're talking about like a disabled vehicle or a vehicle, trailer, RV, whatever it may be, parked in somebody's driveway, and where we draw that line of dictating what they can do with it. And I think that it should really just fall under health and safety. Is it full of rats and causing, problems like that?
Is it licensed and registered?
Yeah, so I think there could be some parameters around that could be set out that encompass health and safety, for sure. But I believe that, to your point, we really have to have the police enforce the street parking, correct? So there's not much we can do about that.
Right. I mean,
That's kind of out of our hands.
I can ask Chief Parker when we bring this back to come back and just give the commission an update on how they enforce it, what the rules are. It is a different section. I mean, this is all private property stuff when we're talking about zoning, and it's the vehicle code when we're talking the streets.
Yeah, because they do become problematic. I've hit my truck mirror on that RV. I won't lie. But
They painted nice little red stripes by the edge of my yard,
yeah.
because he was blocking the road, but he still parks in front of the red stripe. So I think there's different enforcement that we need to focus on, but.
Sure. Carney, Weige, these one?
I agree that we should look at defining screening and possibly adding hard surface, but yeah, just parking, I agree with you about parking on your own property. I mean, I think it ought to be done, but the screening being totally undefined makes it difficult, right? I mean, you screen up about this high and call it good, right?
Correct, yeah.
That would definitely be one area that I'd like to look at. You had pictures of folks parked on the lawn, which is kind of different, right? I mean, it's something I wouldn't want to do, but again, it's on their property. I mean, can we do that? I don't know. But if it was screened, would we know or care? I don't know. I don't think so.
I'd like to back up and I don't have the answer, but I'd like to know what the goals are of this, of having a regulation to begin with. What is trying to be achieved by having this? Is it, I mean, I've heard a little bit about property values. I've heard a little bit about sight and people not wanting to look at something, but I don't know. I think there ought to be something fairly specific laid out that this thing is supposed to accomplish, and then we can see what the rules, if the regulations, the proposed regulations actually accomplish what people agree should be accomplished. And I think it probably is something the community should agree on, because, I mean, there are so many of these situations around town. I just can't fathom, putting a strict regulation on it and then, it'd be like getting people to drive on the other side of the street. It just wouldn't happen, and why make a regulation that does that?
I agree. There needs to be a bigger basis of where this is coming from. I understand complaints drive this, but it needs to be a survey and a consensus because there's such a mass population of the city affected by it. I'm not one of those. My neighbor has one. I have a fun guy that lives in front of my front yard, so I get that. But I still think that this affects the entire community and needs to be addressed in a larger scale than just through the public speaking forum process to make it official. But I think the goal for me is to just give you some tools to take to the next level of saying that should there be a recommendation, we can make improvements to the vagueness that is out there, be utilized, but we have to be very cautious legally of what door that can open up with whatever that is. And so I think defining what the current screening is, for me, would be something like you'd mentioned, hardscape underneath. So it's not just parking in a field or a yard that's out there in no man's land. It needs to be screened if it's off of the hardscape. And if it's screened, it needs to be screened according to the standards of the city, which right now would be 3 feet in the front yard, and we know that's not screening. 5 feet, we know that's not screening. So what is that screening? If it's behind the house, does it have to be 6 feet to screen? And kind of leave as much definition for you of what that screening can be. And if not, there are designated communities within our city that have those regulations from HOA that really would fit the guideline for people to live in. But I don't want the city to become an HOA as well. I get that San Francisco needs that because San Francisco has zero opportunity, but most of those people moved up here because there is this opportunity to have this kind of land. I think, yeah, so hardscape, match the screening to what the current code is. Do not block hardscape or access to and from the home on the driveway, or you're going to get into this problem of having vehicles that would have to be screened. And I think putting an emphasis to the council or whomever the next level is in asking for a prioritization of code enforcement of whether it's abandoned, registered, and on streets and in easements is the really priority of this, and then come back to us and see if they've cleaned up it enough that it's really not that big of a problem. And I think that addresses both the screening and the prioritization going forward.
Yeah, I agree with the three key things: define screening, hardscape surface, operable registered vehicles.
And I would also say our city cannot afford this, but we should waive any permits that are related to someone having to screen their vehicle, because this could be such a large population involved in this that I don't think it should be at their cost of even the permitting to get their own fence put up. I just think we have to waive that because this is a mass problem that we've not defined for years.
Agree, those are really good points.
That's a good point, yeah.
And even with the max screen, it's still going to be visible, so people still have to accept that. And I agree that street facing, blocking those egress paths, it's a big can of worms, because what do you do and what do you not? You know, when does it qualify? And then there are the added costs of having to create that. I also agree with the hardscaping and underneath, whether it be, you know, concrete, drain rock, pavers, or something to hopefully reduce parking in the front yard on the lawn. Like, I think that most people can agree that that's unattractive, and most neighbors wouldn't like that.
Yeah, and then I think you need to prioritize like boats before RVs or something like that, because
Right.
I could see some items having more value in having at your home, so you have immediate access to grab that and go. And a boat may not fit into that model as much as an RV would be, or a trailer.
And what about, what are your guys' thoughts on, if they don't have the ability to screen, what about covers, RV covers? And
Just for the protection of their own property. So
I know.
I don't know if I want to get into the realm of telling people how to protect their own property or cover it.
Depends
I
on
mean,
how
in
they're
lieu
built,
of a
because
screen.
if they're permanent or it's temporary, right?
But I too want to increase my property value. That's why I bought here and left Healdsburg, because I thought there's an opportunity here. And I also don't want this to turn into a hot mess, which it has in many towns, in many parts of this town. And I've already said we need to work on that part first. The abandonment of our car washes and our fun buildings downtown is a lot worse than the screening of an RV in my mind.
So just to summarize, I mean, you're right, the screening, the most we're gonna allow is 5 feet in the front. So if it's in the front yard, it's not really going to be screened.
So you're going to see 5-foot tall fences along the front yard of everyone's home if they do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
But you open the door
To get to Commissioner Waggy, what was the goal of this? I think the goal of the current ordinance was to people to park them, but to try to mitigate the look. And that's why the screening was there, and it was never really defined because there's not really a great way to screen them if they're in the front.
So here, a follow-up question. I know you're going to jump in, Rafa, but I just want to ask one more question. Why is it that a city has a 3-foot front fence ordinance and a 5-foot back fence ordinance? Why do they stagger that between a 3-foot in the front and a 5-foot in the back?
Well, it's 3 in the front and 7 in the back, actually.
7 in the back, yeah.
the
But why
5
is that the standard in a city?
I think just in general that, people expect, I think the expectation of privacy is more in your backyard and your side yard. I think that's kind of generally what it would be.
I think that, and the other thing is, just from a planning perspective, a 6-foot fence in the front is not a very inviting.
It's a very unfriendly neighborhood.
It's not a
It's a very unfriendly
walkable.
practice. They preach this across the nation that we should not do that because it turns a city into something that is extremely unsightful, and it drop your property value if you put large fences in front of the front yard.
Yes,
So I think when
fine.
we're also giving guidance on the screening, you can't go above the 3-foot line in the front. And so I don't think we should be screening what's in the front. I think that's the other recommendation. If it is to try to get it off of the hardscape, it needs to go behind the home, behind screening. but I don't think that you can raise this, but I think keeping it 7 feet in the back behind that is perfectly fine in my mind.
This is why it's vague, I think, because the last time this came up, I think the same issues came up. It's difficult to really come up with a good way to screen in the front yard.
Yeah, and it's an interesting city if we had all 5 or 12-foot fences in the front.
Yeah, you know, a tall screen in the front also makes it a little bit, potential for mischief to be there to, you know, for
It's completely
car,
unsafe.
pedestrian contact kind of a thing, right? I mean, you know, somebody walking by, you don't see them in your vehicle
Cars backing out.
backing out. Yep.
So the screening, well, I'll come back to that. I think I heard agreement for some sort of hardscape, that it has to be parked on something other than grass and lawn. Obviously, it can't be in the right of way, so any encroachment into a sidewalk is not acceptable. It has to be registered, so it has to be current tags on it from the DMV. The suggestion to waive to not allow people to park these in the front. I mean, unless I'm mistaken there, I mean, I think we want to allow people the ability to do that, but we want to mitigate the look of that the best we can through these regulations. And the screening is a part of that, you know, having it on a pad, so it's not on the lawn. And anything else we can think of that
Driveways and sideways that are hardscape, does that have to be permitted and run through the city for approval?
no, flat work
No?
like that wouldn't, no.
To possibly get into some kind of I don't know, if there's something in the code as to what percentage of the lot can be covered? Does Cloverdale have a rule like that?
With paving?
About anything, yeah. Paving.
Structures, yeah, for sure, yeah, structures, but paving doesn't come into that.
Yeah, I
that-
don't think you
Paving's
want to
not.
do that in today's climate with everyone xeriscaping their yard. But I can also see the limitation of number of stored vehicles on a property, because I don't know if you can store 10 to 12 RVs without becoming a storage yard and going commercial. So I think you can think about that as well as the number of these devices that can be on one property, size, so like a ratio of this many per size, or maybe that's where you get the zoning involved.
So would that be quantity or?
Yeah, quantity.
Square footage of vehicles, right? I mean, you have a whole bunch of little ones or, you know, a couple.
Well, that's the one thing you missed on your list is the concern about people storing multiple vehicles for company purposes that are being stored in residential areas that are also, I think, part of this problem that we're seeing in our community.
Just to
they're not-
touch on, give a little bit of context to that, the home, or like the fleet vehicle thing. City does have home occupation standards, you know, someone can have a business out of their home. They need a business license and they need a home occupation permit. And the home occupation permit does have some minor things about vehicles, and it essentially says that the home occupation shall not utilize more than one vehicle, and it says something like, no, and the vehicle can't be bigger than a 3/4 ton truck. It doesn't say anything about any trailers or that. So it kind of limits someone, you know, they can't have fleet vehicles. They can have one truck, essentially. And that's it.
Yeah, it's not like a limit to 10 trucks per home.
No.
And we are dealing with what you're talking about, Commissioner AC. There are commercial vehicles being parked on the streets for businesses, as we discussed earlier. And again, that's going to be a police matter, and we do have open enforcement on some of those. So it's a little different in that this is trying to get at the RV and boat, but it's definitely a problem that's out there that we're aware of.
So I think we're all in consensus then that the takeaway is screening on the side yard to the maximum of 7 feet, the hardscape surface to park the vehicles on, and that they need to be registered and/or operable.
Yeah, both. They need to be operable and they need to be registered.
The only thing I think about with that is, you know, sometimes people do have projects that they're working on, restoring a vehicle, something like that, or if you non-op a vehicle, like I have family members that non-op vehicles during certain times a year, and like my godmother's convertible Mustang, she non-ops it for half the year because she doesn't use it, and then insures and registers it. You know what I'm saying? There's,
I totally
yeah.
appreciate your take on it.
So, is it registered and/or operable?
To get back to an earlier question about the other code section regarding inoperable vehicles, not a lot there. It just says really, the following should not be visible from the street right of way, and then it's trash, garbage, household, and then one of them says inoperable vehicles in various states of disrepair, and vehicle parts. So
yeah, it doesn't really define what inoperable
Where,
is.
and where, though? Where is that?
It's-
Is it
it says-
directly in the front yard?
Well, it says stored in yards and visible from public streets or other rights of way. The following, you can't do that, and then one of them is the inoperable vehicle. So if we wanted to bring that into this section of the code, we would probably refer to this other section, just
Just tying them together.
tie them together.
I get that, and I think it's one of those things that the city just, again, we're going back to, you should be enforcing this more, and the police need to get more involved. And the streets and the easements need to be the priority, and then you go to inoperable, and then when they're talking to the inoperable and working on it, they can receive a grace period of what they're gonna do with the city, but the city needs to control it. But I think we need to set a standard, because right now there's no standard, then everyone's complaining with their neighbors about what is not there. Don't screen the driveways.
What's
I
that?
agree.
I don't think
I
we
think
should
what
be
we'll
screening
do
the
is-
driveways, and I don't think we should stop people from parking in their driveway as long as it's off the easement and the and it's on private property.
I think that's general consensus, right?
Absolutely, for me, anyway.
So I think what we're gonna do is take what we heard, add some stuff, bring it back, invite the public again.
Do you need us to speak at the next public thing?
You wanna speak?
Normally would not, you know that. I would totally avoid the next meeting, but if this needs to be passed on correctly, I don't mind making sure that we're represented correctly.
Well, we'll do our best on what we heard,
Okay.
bring it back. If you can bring it back again, if you're not comfortable with it, or if you change your mind on something. I mean, ultimately, we're trying to get to a recommendation to the council. So I appreciate you guys going through this the way you did and taking the public comment and coming up with some good comments. And we'll do our best to encapsulate what we heard, bring it back. You can take a look at it again.
So, moving on to item H, then, department reports.
Nothing, let's see here. We're working with the Osty Road Apartments. They're getting close to getting a building permit.
Wait, what was that one?
The Osty Road Apartments, the one that the Planning Commission took a long look at.
Yep.
And, yeah. So they're working to hopefully to get a building permit pretty soon. We haven't received any new applications for anything, the 4 lots, so you got some.
We did receive an application for a vacation rental use permit, different than the one that was already submitted. So technically, we have 2 submitted, but one's been incomplete for a while, but,
Does that go to commission? Okay,
Yeah.
so.
yeah. But it just literally got submitted today,
Where's it located?
on Commercial Street in the OR district,
In the what?
the Office and Multifamily Residential District. So it's in a district that they're allowed. It's on Commercial Street. And
There's a zoning district called Office Residential, which kind of, it flanks the downtown, so you could have either an office or a house. Some of the vacation rentals are allowed with just a permit that we issue under certain circumstances. Other ones will be coming to Planning Commission, and we'll be writing conditions like no noise after a certain time, and, you guys can consider.
Parking.
Yeah.
Stuff,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I don't think there's any, go ahead.
What's going on at the old brewery? Is somebody going in there?
Oh, yeah. It was sold, but I didn't hear of any tenants. You talking about the Bear Republic?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the property in front of it, we've met with the new owner who's putting together an application for kind of a business park roll-up door project. So we're working with him to get those plans together.
And then
But-
does that include the lot in front?
The lot in front was recently purchased by a local contractor he's putting together an application for the roll-up door industrial kind of, almost like riser a little bit, like a mini riser.
So which one, so the building where the brewery was, that's one, is that a separate parcel than the one in
Yeah.
front?
Yeah, it's separate owners now.
And that recently sold.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, looks like it's been painted and people are working over there now.
I haven't heard of any tenants yet, but we have talked to the new owner a couple times, and so it was sold.
Any update on the 101 opening?
Do you talk to her?
Not really.
There's intermittent work, but
That
Oh.
music slash restaurant?
Slow but steady, looks like, yeah.
we'll ask her, and then when we come next time, we'll have.
From the First Street side, they've definitely, obviously, look, they've done a lot of work from the front too, but you can see like what they've done in like the back
The
half.
fire
of the-
riser in,
Yeah,
that's the toughest part.
yeah, it's coming along.
Fast enough. That's the end of my report, unless there's questions.
Item I, Commissioner reports. Would any commissioners like to provide any reports this evening? I will say that painting the curb on Jefferson Street was really well received. I think a lot of people were relieved. There was a lot of comments on that people can actually get out of there without worrying about being T-boned anymore.
Well, our Public Works Director, Derek, is here, so we can
Thank
thank him
you,
for that
Derek.
one.
Yeah, that and the parking lines out here on the boulevard as well as Main Street, it's really nice to see done.
Written reports. I assume there's none, since there's no commissioner reports. Commission direction on future agenda items. Would any commissioners like to provide direction on any future planning commission or subcommittee agenda items?
I do have a question to see if we would want this. Are we having any update on the Alexander Valley Resort area? Any new prospects or anything that to report back to? It's been a while since we've talked about that.
We'll go back to director's reports. There does seem to be an interested party that has been negotiating for several months. David and I spoke to her not that long ago, and it seems to they're still in negotiations. So it seems like one of the better prospects since I've been here for 5 years, talking to different groups coming in. And so, we have our fingers crossed that this deal can happen and we can start moving forward on that.
What about the parks project from here to the county line? Is that updatable?
I don't have an update. I can ask and bring that back.
Those would be some of the items I'd love to know more about if
The
you ever
parks.
get to that level of bringing it to us to see where that's at.
Items? No? All right, that brings us to our adjournment. Thank you all for coming. This meeting is adjourned at 7:11 PM to the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission on June 4th, 2020.